So Arthur, welcome to South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you. Arthur worked with South Yorkshire for many years as a firefighter, then known as a fireman. And I think you finished your career as a sub-officer with the newly formed South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue, prior to which you worked with the Sheffield City Fire Brigade. Thanks for joining us today, Arthur. What we're going to do, hopefully, is ask you some questions and give you an opportunity to talk to us about your experiences from joining the Auxiliary Fire Service into Sheffield City Fire Brigade, what it was like in terms of the training, the equipment and the type of incidents that you attended and some of the challenges. But I note with thanks that you sent me a letter in January of this year, Arthur, highlighting to me one particular incident that you'd attended. You're not quite sure of the date, and we'll get into that. In the late 60s at the Effingham Street Gasworks, because many people remember a significant incident in 1973 at the Effingham Street Gasworks where there was a large explosion and a number of people killed, and that's been well documented. However, your letter was explaining to me that you attended another incident prior to that that you don't feel has been given recognition, and I think that's one of the key conversations that we'll get into this afternoon. So welcome back to the service. It's nice to see that you're wearing with pride your medal ribbons that you achieved during your career, and obviously you're a proud member of the National Association of Retired Firefighters, and you've been an active member of that group, I understand, for many years. So over to you, Arthur. Please talk to me about your career in the fire and rescue services.
1963 I joined Sheffield Auxiliary Fire Service, which was part of the Civil Defence Organisation. At that time, there was very much talk of a Third World War, and it culminated with Russia sending several ships to Cuba to put missiles on Cuban soil, and President Kennedy confronting the Russians saying, "We'll sink your ships if you send them to Cuba." And the world stood on and waited like we are today, wondering who was going to blink first. Fortunately for us, the Russians turned the ships back, and the world sighed a big sigh of relief. But the Auxiliary Fire Service was an excellent backup service for the emergency services if they'd have used them. Because the floods, they got equipment to relay water. I mean, I've said before, we used to lay a pipeline, a 6-inch water pipeline from Riverlin down to Infirmary Road, which is off the roughly where the roundabout is at bottom of Oil Street. There. So we could do that in a night. You could put a line down, a fresh water supply to the city. And that was just done in 2 hours, in a 2-hour session. Or the other side of the AFS was that they could relay water to 10 pumping appliances and have all the branches out on all the lines out on those machines, feeding water with the good jets. And you'd make a massive water curtain. It was a bit chaotic because it was a civilian based idea or civilian run organisation with an A.
But the objectives around, you use this phrase then, civil defence, and I think that many people will probably not recognise that fire services, certainly the Auxiliary Fire Service and the fire services that were developed post Second World War, were designed with exactly that in mind. It was the risk of aerial bombardment of large city centres like Sheffield, that was a large steel manufacturing centre, and of course that would have gone towards our own weapons and munitions. And I think that people don't realise that many fire services were effectively organised in order to protect building stock subjected to aerial bombardment.
I mean, when you the fire brigade and the AFS hated one another. They hated us on Wednesday night. Just as they were going to sit down to the meal, the firemen were sitting down to the meal, the AFS would roll back with all the dirty hose, all the dirty equipment, and just dump it in the drill yard for the firemen to shift
and clean
and restore.
Yeah.
So we never endeared ourselves to the, but there was, the men who was in the AFS were also originally in the NFS, the National Fire Service, and the sub-officer I had, he was a sub-officer in the NFS, and he came back because of the war threat to train us recruits.
Yeah. And what was your normal working pattern when you were a member of the auxiliary fire service then, Arthur?
You weren't compulsory to attend, but so Wednesday night was your drill night. The weekend you went away to Chorley or somewhere like that, or Sherwood Forest. Now, I don't know whether I'm speaking out of turn here, but Sherwood Forest has got a series of humps in it, and that was to hide the fire engines. And you'd drive your machine into these humps, take the ladders off, spread them across the top of the humps, put a salvage sheet, and that's where you spent the night.
Right.
So you camped out with your fire engine on the thing, and that was the idea, that should war be declared, you would go to a dispersal unit. And these dispersal units were in the forests around England and Scotland, and that was where you go. And you would go out of the city before, so the AFS would disappear off the face as far as the fire brigade. The fire brigade would have to then go around the streets with the handheld siren to giving the 4-minute warning.
Yeah, giving people a warning.
Yeah.
Wow. And I think now, like I said, I don't think many people will perhaps realise that fire services were initially designed to protect buildings from aerial bombardment, because obviously large fires would have broke out, and people perhaps, you know, have seen videos, or you know, there won't be that many people recalling what it was like during the Blitz. But the fire services of the time would have been extremely busy dealing with a number of large-scale fires following aerial bombardments.
They reckoned at the time, when the instructors, what we had, where they got this information from, I don't know, that 3 would land around Sheffield. There'd be 3 nuclear bombs that would last around Sheffield, wiping it for a 20-mile radius off the face of Earth. The soldiers would then come in and put out of the misery any casualties that were suffering from radioactive burns. And that,
scary prospects, eh? Scary prospects.
It were, and we said afterwards, when we spoke after this to other people who were in FS, would you have gone? Would you have come in to save yourself? You might live, but your family would die. Would you go in knowing full well what prospects were?
Yeah.
And often I said, no, we won't.
So tell me a little bit then, Arthur, about your transition from the auxiliary fire service into
I thought,
the Sheffield City Brigade.
With AFS, I weren't exactly a novice, but I was not a numbskull either.
Yeah.
And I found, as soon as I walked through the doors of the fire station, that all of a sudden I was less than a chocolate fire guard. It was useless. And I couldn't understand it, why there was so much resentment from my officers who were, we don't want him here, send him back. Like I were
and is this because of the conflict between the AFS and the fire service?
I have no idea.
Or some kind of, you've got to prove yourself before you're accepted?
Yeah, and steelworks was, the firemen of that time were men who'd served during the Second World War. And Mr. Peel, who we'll talk about later, he was a fireman in 1938. He got drafted out of the fire service into the army to be a captain in the 8th Army, and he saw service in Africa as a tank commander. So he went up. So when he came back to Sheffield to take up his job, he found he was at bottom of the pile. And there was a lot of firemen who had been conscripted during the war into the National Fire Service, who stayed on. And they got promoted. Some of them got demoted. And there was this bitter conflict between what they class as Mother's Own Fireside Borderers, or D-Day Dodgers, and I was classed as a D-Day Dodger. My mother was 9 months pregnant when D-Day landed, so I was not exactly fit for duty at 0 years old, but I couldn't understand it, and war was so relevant to what you did.
And that's
Where
really,
was you and D-Day?
But the interesting comparison is that we recognise in the modern fire and rescue service, where principles of diversity, inclusion, equality of opportunity is something that we are still grappling with. And people have explained to me that they've had experiences where they've come into the service and felt, that they've had to prove themselves, and they've not felt initially embraced and welcomed and accepted. But those are experiences that were happening many, many years ago by what people perceive would be an accepted group into the fire service, which is a young white man. Because of your experiences and your previous work, and whether or not had got experiences in a military career or not, perhaps those were the kind of norms and accepted people coming into us.
They thought we were soft, I think. I think at that time, they thought civilian, soft. But I can assure you, steelworks was a
tough gig.
Tough. You had to be tough to survive.
Yeah. So how did you prove yourself to those early?
Well, I shocked them by speaking out. I could never get this. Like I said, at 19 off, I had an apprentice under me. When I come on fire survey, all of a sudden they thought I wasn't capable of holding a mop. And I just couldn't get my head around this. Yes, sir. No, sir. Salute him. Don't salute him. So,
yeah. And you started your training at Mansfield Road, you say, 12 or 13 weeks there. Basic pumped ladders.
Yeah.
And then where were you posted?
I was posted to Elm Lane.
Okay.
It's a brilliant station. And I've got maps. I can tell you where the well is, which is in the engine house. That's why the engine house floor's strengthened there.
Yep.
And why there's an hole in the roof where the pole comes through, or I don't know whether they still have poles.
Yes.
Why the pole was drilled afterwards, but that's another story later on. And I was stationed at Elm Lane, and the officer, like I said, didn't particularly want me. They wanted a leading fireman, and he got a recruit. But I kept on at my studies. I didn't back off, and I tried to prove myself to them that, all right, I'm saying things wrong.
Yeah.
I'm doing things wrong. I'll listen if you talk to me in a nice way, but don't talk to me like I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Because I will jump on you like a ton of bricks.
And I got that sense from your book, and you talked about an incident you attended in your book where you were not yet qualified as a breathing apparatus wearer, who would have been deployed to fight a fire in a premises fire or a house fire.
Yeah.
And we'll get on to the type of incidents you attended in your early career.
But
that incident, I remember, because you described vividly, without breathing apparatus, post-fire, so the fire had been dealt with by whoever had gone in first, and you were asked to go and ventilate. So just talk us through, and at that, and then there were another fire where they did allow you to wear breathing apparatus, and you got a bit more respect from your colleagues. So talk us through both of those jobs, Arthur.
Yeah, the fire was on Southey Green Road, which is just down the road from Elm Lane, and it was a good smoky fire. It was a first house fire that I'd been allowed to get on the machine to.
Yeah.
And I was asked to get the hose reel. I got the hose reel. I tested that it had got water on before I handed it to the BA wearers. Who was going to go in, and they didn't. And then Albert Reen, who was my station officer, said to my sub officer, "Ventilate, Tom." And he grabbed me. He says, "Come on, Levick. We're going to be ventilating." So I looked at things, and there was smoke coming out. Right, take a gobful. I hope that don't offend anybody. Take a gobful.
Of fresh air.
Fresh air. Run upstairs. Smack the catch. Chuck window up. Stick your head out. Take another breath of air, and follow me into the bedrooms. And we did that 2 times. Into the bedroom. Find the window. Under the window. Take a breathful, and then off out again.
So you're now at Elm Lane plying your trade, you've done your initial training. Did you move stations, Arthur, during your early career?
As a recruit, the officers were sent, this chief sent out a message, all recruits in excess of a station were to go down to Division Street. And so you went to Division Street mainly. Went to Division Street because they got the the turntable ladders, the emergency tender, and other things. So it were to get you used to those machines,
yeah,
as well as firefighting capability. And I got a gold star because I went to a house fire. Before you had to go, every year you went on, in the summer months, all the brigade came up to Elm Lane to go through breathing apparatus tests. And what they did was a building that was used as a control room. And in it, there was all the old telephones and everything. There was a blast wall, there was a 36-inch diameter pipe, and there was a 36 diameter pipe inside the building for you to crawl through, and then there was an area, so like what we've got here, and that had a straw from a stables,
yeah,
you know, the wire, and any rubbish that they could get hold of was set on fire. And so it was graded to you from a crew to a C wearer. You started off as a C wearer, you became a B wearer on your first year, on your second year you became an A wearer. I was then a C wearer, and we had this bad house fire, and we got it originally as a chimney fire, but when we turned the corner, the smoke was sweeping across the road. It was obviously it had a very good chimney fire, and the officer, as soon as he got round back, he said, "Ella, it's a house fire." So we dropped ladder on side of building. The leading fireman that we had then, and Jack, who was one of the bearers, linked arms to try to kick the door down. Well, they ran up the stairs, hit it, and was shot back, and then again. and they were running up and down trying to kick this door in to get access into the house. And I realised, Jack, they wanted. Ken was already dressed in his breathing apparatus, and I knew Jack was still being engrossed in breaking into house. So I went to the machine, put the set on, went through the starting up procedure. Goggles. You didn't wear a helmet. You had a miner's lamp, a miner's helmet. You didn't wear your fireman helmet. You wore a miner's helmet, and and I went through the starting up, cracked the valve, breathed in, clean your system out of oxygen, check that it had got oxygen.
Yeah, check your gauge,
the salvus had got it in. Check all your details, goggles on, nose clip on, and I went and joined Ken at the door. I said, I'm with you, Ken. And so we went in and we started putting out the fire, and the sub-officer crawled in and he was pulling on my leg because we were down. We got really... You used to get down. Do you still do that?
Yeah, you get under the level of the smoke if you.
There's
a separation between the fresh air and the smoking room called the neutral plane, and we teach firefighters to operate underneath the neutral plane, and obviously that gives you better visibility.
Yeah. Well,
and it's cooler.
Yeah, and so we were ducking down and we were down on floor, and sub-officer were grabbing my leg. Go upstairs. Check upstairs, leave a branch here, go and check upstairs. So we went upstairs, and it was funny because, like I said, you got your mouthpiece in, and you weren't supposed to talk, you were supposed to give hand signals. And Ken was saying, "It's sure hot in here, isn't it?" Yes, shish. And you're trying not to spit your mouthpiece out. And so we walked up, and he says, "My ears are snurping, Arthur. My ears are snurping." God, it were hot. It were really hot. And we eat from them putting fire out and steam. But we searched round and we couldn't find out upstairs. And we went outside and took the vents off. And old Ken says, "Well, that's your first fatality, and first fatality you'll have been to." I said, "I haven't seen no." He says, "Well, it were." He says, "I saw it when I were in there."
Yeah.
And some said afterwards, "Do you want to go and have a look round?" And so we went in, and there were a lady, an old lady who had passed away during the night, and the paper she was reading had fallen the fire and set fire to
And I think most firefighters will remember the first experience where they come across somebody who's sadly passed away in a house fire, and it's not the nicest experience, is it? But going back to your kind of experience at that job, you probably came away feeling that you've got over a certain milestone in terms of your competency as a breathing apparatus wearer.
And the sub-officer at that time said, "From now on in, you're air wearer."
Ah, okay. So he'd seen
I
some
jumped,
skills that you'd got.
I jumped to a space.
Yeah.
And because Division Street always seemed to be short of BA wearers, and being a recruit, so I was often sent down as a BA wearer at Division Street.
Yeah, and I'm presuming that
which was like a start for me.
And that probably felt like a milestone for you in your early career, that you'd got that over the line, you were recognised as a competent BA wearer, which probably elevates your status amongst your peers. Not that it necessarily should, but perhaps the culture that you joined, those things elevated your status.
You're one of them.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And just thinking back to how you described what your donning procedure for breathing apparatus then. Obviously I joined late 90s and it were all self-contained. Your face mask had got an inner mask, and effectively there were no exposure of your skin to the elements, so you'd got a hood over the top of your face mask, and then you did wear your firefighter's helmet. We've got much better quality gloves, so the equipment and the PPE that we got allowed you to operate in conditions that previously your ears would have been almost melting in.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to see that you still got your ears out there.
Oh.
So that's a good thing.
But like you said, gloves were a no-no.
Yeah.
We went in one BA incident on Peter Street, and the bloke I was with we were searching on the bed, and he put his hand in the bed, and he put his hand into a Dunlopilla pillow, and the rubber, I don't know, I don't know if they still have them, and it was just molten rubber, and so he got molten rubber on his hands.
Oh.
And I mean, but as I said, you don't wear gloves.
Yeah, well, I certainly think that the level of protection that we afford to firefighters now has definitely come on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Since
I mean, I always
first
used to wear
joined.
gloves because steelworks. You always wore
Yeah.
the industrial gloves, and I could never. Like I said, has he got gloves on again?
Yeah.
Has he got his gloves on?
But going back to that, because it's a really valid point in terms of the acceptance of the evolution and improvement in protective equipment. You mentioned how one of the first jobs that you did ventilation, you had to go and take lungfuls of air at the windows after you opened them, which sounds, horrific to me in terms of health and safety policy and procedure. And now, of course, we stipulate that firefighters have to be in breathing apparatus under air if they're exposed to any type of contaminant in terms of smoke. But that equipment were available to you, but why do you feel it wasn't being perhaps used as much in your experience?
Work manly.
Yeah.
It would. Can you take punishment? The first, when you came on a station, I know, like being stations exploited what they got. Elm Lane have got breathing apparatus, so you were always going to have lots of breathing apparatus drills, always. But the first day you go, it happened to everyone. The officer, after the first drill was over, would get the recruit and say, right, we're going in, you follow me. And you went into the smoke chamber without a breathing apparatus on. And you went down the lower tunnel till you came to what was a shelf, and you climbed up the shelf to the top, and so you were sat on top of the fire, this big fire with a big hole there. So you passed the fire, and then you slid down the other side, dropped down that, round the bend to the end, then back in through the rooms, and they used to have asbestos slabs, and they could they made walls about 3 foot high, and they made rat roots, and we changed them around.
Changed the layout, so you didn't become too familiar,
Yeah, so you followed the rat room till you came to the 36-inch diameter hole, up through the hole, down the other side, and then out. And that was your first experience of, and that's how you said, like, you coughed and spluttered, and that's how you that would to be your norm.
Yeah.
Can you take it? Yes, you can.
Yeah. And I think it's certainly come on in leaps and bounds in terms of the policy, the procedures, the equipment that we offer to modern firefighters in order to prevent them from being exposed to all of those contaminants. And
one of the things, the normal air set, when we had it was normal air, and we used to do this drill where you took your set off, passed it through this diameter hole to the other side, and slid through after your set. Do they do that now?
Yeah, if you need to get through a confined space, we need to be able to remove the set, keep your mask on under air, so you've still got respiratory protection. Yeah, and then pass your set through, and then you'd follow it through. But yeah, I recall doing that in my training, where you got confined spaces, and you wouldn't have been able to squeeze through the gap if your set was on your back and your cylinder was
No.
on your back. So you needed to remove your cylinder but keep your face mask intact, and you're still breathing air from the cylinder.
Yeah.
Feed your breathing apparatus set through the small opening, and then you'd struggle.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you're 6'2" like myself,
Well,
you'd struggle through the opening, and then you'd redon your back plate. Yeah, I remember it quite well.
There was the outside drain was to get used to claustrophobic.
And we still test people for claustrophobia, we test people for height. So the national selection tests that we adopt now include all elements of like the physical requirements of the role. But it's also moved towards, I mean, the modern role of firefighting now includes a lot more community safety work, going into schools, doing education programs. So it's a lot more community focused to try and prevent emergencies happening before they do. But then, of course, you've got to default back to the traditions of emergency response. So, and that's why we still invest in fire engines and equipment.
The normal air set,
do that.
when we had ammonia leak, just at Page Hall, and that was the first time we'd had the full face mask, and it was Ken Kendrick and Jack Furnace who was sent one of the letters, and they went into the ammonia and they came straight back out because it had penetrated through the side and they just couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
They couldn't breathe. The sets, the normal air set had more leaks in it than enough. Though it was still shoving it out, a lot of times when you move your face, you broke the seal.
Yeah, and I think that the positive pressure in the modern sets would mean that if there were any seal broken, the pressure coming out would overcome the pressure coming in.
Yeah.
So you'd get a flow of air and a leak. And if firefighters do that, they've either got an incorrectly fitted face mask or something's gone wrong, and they'd be expected to make their way out to safety, really. But no, all really interesting. Listen, we've got to get on to the incident that you wrote to me about.
Yeah.
So we're not quite sure on the exact dates, but we're thinking late 1960s, certainly before the 1973 Effingham Street gasworks explosion that's been well documented.
Yeah.
So tell us about that night, Arthur.
We get a call, and it's two naphtha tankers and a gas holder involved in fire. What had happened on Effingham Street, the two tankers arrived too soon. The woman on the weighbridge, the public weighbridge, said, "I can't deal with you, park up on Sussex Street." So they did. Now, if what's going to happen on an incident, there's got to be the element that works against you, Murphy's Law, whatever you want to call it. That day, gas workers, or the lighting people, had decided to decommission a gas lamp. So they dug round the gas lamp, exposed the gas pipe, and then packed in and put paraffin lamps round the hole.
As a warning to stop people
stop it. The front tanker contained 500 gallons of naphtha. The one at back contained 1,500 gallons of naphtha. It's on a slight, it's into big hill, but it's a slight hill, a slight raise. The two lorry drivers got out, we're going to have a cup of tea, we're going to have a break. Yeah. The handbrake on the front wagon, on the 500 gallon, failed, and it rolled back down the hill and punctured his tank on the mudguard of the tractor type trailer and tank. The leakage from the tank flowed down the road to the paraffin lamp, then back up, exploded the front tank. The sound of the explosion was sufficient to frighten the lady in the weighbridge, so she fell off a stool and broke a leg. The safety valves on 2 of the tanks, blew. 1 hit the million cubic foot gas holder, the main gas holder, and punctured that and set fire to that. The flames, I don't know how this happened, but I finished up as a runner part of that night. It set fire to the office building out, but I've got a feeling it must have been the soffits, that area. It must have been the soffits that were on fire, not the office. So the officer, when he arrived from Darnell, got 2 tankers involved, a gas holder and an office block. And it was chaos. All the appliances arrived. We from Lane had a spectacular journey down. Our appliances had been taken in for routine maintenance, and we got the spare Rolls-Royce pump escape, and that had got a crash gearbox. And Ken were having difficulty getting it. We get first gear, but when it come to second gear, he couldn't get it in. So we kangarooed on Lane, freewheeled down Barnsley Road till we got to Fir Vale, and once we stuck at Fir Vale, we were at bottom, and Ken said, and Tom Varley said, "Can't you get it, Ken?" And he says, "If I can do any better, come in." And so they swapped places. Now, Tom Varley were known for being a fast appliance driver. He'd blown up 2 fire engines already. It was noted for being
too quick.
And he crashed it in, and we shot off up Barnsley Road over towards Spittal Hill. I'm not saying what speeds we did, but we were clinging on to grim death. And there was a time, a Summit fire engine, I don't know whether they have them still, handrail.
Yeah.
And we play hands,
white knuckles on it, wasn't there?
And we, Terry Smith, we had him with Terry Smith, and we were going down Penistone Road on that one, and we skidded, come to the bottom, and the appliance was travelling sideways. There was a load of men waiting to go fishing, and they're all sat on the boxes. And we came down and we watched them, and then Terry managed to keep it on road and shot off to Bassett's. But we're looking at Mirror, and all the men had disappeared, only the legs were sticking up in the air. And this night with Effingham Road were one of them nights. We clung on. Tom made that machine howl. And I don't know what speeds we did, but we were at back of Division Street's pump escape. When we turned into the Wicker, the pump escape just passed by. So we followed Wicker, Division Street's wagon, which had got less, perhaps 1.5 miles to travel to 3 miles. But we're at back on it. So like I said, none of us couldn't believe that we got there in time.
And you'd had a changeover of drivers.
Yeah. And Tom got out and Ken took over. And Tom went to see, Mr. Peel was there to greet us. And he said straight away, "Tom, get your lads to put foam on and help Ken Danks with these tankers." So we picked up cans. Do you carry foam?
Yeah, we still carry foam. We have bulk stock, but...
Does it still have the metal ring in the top, your hand?
I can't remember that, no.
They were painted
it's a
white.
solution with a pickup tube that you put into it if it's not bulk stock now.
It was a 2-gallon can with a washer bolted to the top. So to differentiate between diesel and petrol tanks. So you grab this thing and it bit into your hand. So you got 2 of them, we got as much as you could carry with 1 in each hand. So I've got 4-gallon. Keith Parker's got 4-gallon. Jack Furnace has got the number 2 making branch with its knapsack tank and the tube. We get round the corner onto Sussex Street, there's nobody there. Only a line, a jet out, with an A-type branch. It was just snaking across road, banging its way around. So me and Keith dropped his cans, and we dropped onto oars, and we pinned it down. So we got it under control. Tom said then to Jack, go and get him to knock this off. So Jack dropped his thing, and he then said, I'm going to find out what's gone off. So officer left, so there's me and Keith on this branch, and this 500 gallon of naphtha going. So we put it on the tanker. Mr. Hibbert came round the corner, the ADO, the senior officer from Darnell. What the hell are you lads doing? He didn't say that. What are you doing? Get it on that tank. So we changed his target to the tank. We'd no sooner done that when Mr. Peel came round. What? Same thing, same vocabulary. What the... Get it onto that tanker, keep a water curtain between tanker and...
So you're getting mixed messages.
Yeah, so within minutes, so we waited and they wouldn't listen. They would not listen. Said, just do as you're told. Just do as you're told. That were it, do as you're told. And Tom came back and Jack had come back then. He said, I've knocked it off. Getting him to knock it off. And he says, no, I'm going to emulsify it. And he told me afterwards what he decided then. He thought the foam that he could get from our machine and Darnell's machine was insufficient for the job required. So he decided that he was going to get the biggest jets onto the tanker and emulsify the whatever was coming out. Yeah. So he was going to send Jack, but then he said, Arthur, you do it. Go and get this line knocked off and get him to give me £100 per square inch. And we'll get these, because it had a big jet on it, a big nozzle on it. I went back to where it was, and it was in Darnell's pump. And a fireman called Ron Griffiths was the pump operator, and he told me that he was feeding their turntable ladder, and he said, I can't give you £100 per square inch because I've got a bloke up on ladder, and he says I can't endanger him to give you £100. So I'd either got choice then. Do I go back to Tom Varley and tell him that what he can't, what he could do, or I could try sorting water situation out myself. So I decided that I would get water from somewhere. So I went down, picked up some oars, and I'm thinking to myself, I'll find one light pumps. The light pumps were the River Don. When it slowed down, I don't even notice there's islands for them. And they got several lightweight pumps on these islands, and they were having they got 6 lengths of hard suction to get it to the water. So they got, and I think at that time I didn't think it were possible. I thought it were impossible. That length, I wouldn't have thought you could have picked up water, but you can.
Yeah, you struggled to prime it, but I know.
Yeah, so but it's flat. It was on a thing. So he got a pump there with just a length out, but no, just water, just keeping it charged. And I says, "What's it for?" He says, they came and they went. I says, well, I'm going to use it. I'm saying, you're feeding on lanes pliance now. This is what we're doing. Yeah. So I run a length of hose out to Ken.
Yeah. But it sounds like there were plenty of fire service resources there.
To join it back in from our machine to Darnell's machine, run to Tom, telling him, I'm knocking off, you're getting water, and I'll explain later. And I came back down, and I twin line from lightweight pump to ours, so it got caught at frictional loss, so it got good water supply. I then run out of started on a second length of hose, so Tom had got two lines out. And so we did all right, so we had plenty of water. All the machines that night had plenty of water. We got Riverdon, we got hydrants, everything as far as the firefighting was concerned, we got plenty of it. All appliances that were there, Mansfield Road were on Sussex Road on top. There was a TL further down on Effingham Road, and so that were two TLs, our pump, Rocco's pumps. I can't recall seeing at Norton's Low Edge, what became then Low Edge's pump. I can't recall that, but I've told it were there afterwards. I was told it were there afterwards.
But it sounds like there were plenty of fire service resources there.
But I'm thinking like that night, I became a fireman. I think I patted myself on the back that it was me who had to decide where water came from.
Yeah. And at what point did you feel that you'd started to get on top of this fire and surround it?
Well,
under control?
It'd be early hours of morning.
But the conclusion to the incident was that major disaster was averted by the actions of the crews that night, by the sounds of it.
We got the impression straight away that the two officers in charge, fire officers in charge, were worried that it were going to go. And it was going to happen.
Yeah.
As far as they were concerned, there was more chance of it happening than not happening.
Yeah. So, and I sense in your letter, Arthur, because you've covered, your recollections of this incident, which sounds like, major disaster was averted, quite likely through the actions of yourselves and your colleagues, and I dare say many members of staff that worked at the works that night.
Definitely.
And you've articulated in your letters to me, your frustrations that this incident's not being given due recognition that you feel it deserves compared to other incidents where there was a disaster. Yeah. And therein lies some of the challenge, because it's often the case that if there's a major incident and it results in mass fatalities, those types of emergencies get remembered, recognised, memorials, events to remember. And perhaps some of the things that firefighters experienced during their career in the service, where they put themselves in harm's way to result in that disaster being averted, are perhaps not as recognised as much.
Well, that night, we runners had to go round to our respective watchers, station watchers, to tell the last order we got from Mr. Peel, all officers to collect any firefighter, because we were all getting split up. Yeah. Mansfield Road working with Darnell and everywhere. We're just all grouped. Collect your men back into watchers. Into your crews. And the reason for that was to aid death count, so that they knew that area Elm Lane was, that area Division Street was, that area, and as numbers on us coats would identify us.
Yeah, and thankfully that wasn't required.
No.
And obviously you've articulated that in your letter, in the story that you recollect to me today in relation to that incident. And from my perspective, all I can say is it sounds like it was one of those once in a career type moments where you do put yourself in harm's way to protect the communities that you're there to serve, and you've done that.
It's perfect.
You've done that evening.
This on medalist you get after 25 years service.
20 now. So it's 20 years. Yeah, you're long. So that's Arthur's long service and good conduct medal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would have been given to you by the Queen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it says on it, for exemplary fire service. That night, I can't think of anything better you could do.
Yeah. Arthur, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you today.
And I wish to thank you all for allowing me to have this moment of glory.
Well,
but there was, I'd like to just say, I'd like to thank Jake Furnace, Keith Parker and Terry Perkins, who started me off on this quest. Terry's no longer with us, and a lot of the firemen who attended that night are no longer with us. But at least we've got it recognised, and I thank the Chief Fire Officer, Mr. Chris Kirby, for his kindness shown to me today. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Arthur. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you and to listen to your stories of your career. And I'm sure that this video, you know, once it's produced, there'll be something that captures that moment in time, and it will always be there. So for your family, for generations to come, they'll be able to listen to you talking about your experiences in your career, which sounds like it was a colourful career. So
very colourful.
Once again, well done, and thank you for your service protecting the communities across Sheffield and South Yorkshire. It's been great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.